In Shattered Bonds, Alex Harding's life changes forever when he is forced to care for Ethan Westbrook, the heir to the powerful Westbrook family. After a tragic accident leaves Ethan brain dead. As Ethan wakes up, the two form a bond that defies societal boundaries, leading them on a tumultuous journey of love and self-discovery. Caught between loyalty, family obligations, and their forbidden love, they must decide if they can overcome everything standing in their way. Part 1. Alex Harding's world had always been one of quiet desperation. The first thing you would notice about him was his eyes, tired, weary, but determined, as though they had seen too much and yet not enough. At 25, he had already lived a lifetime of hardship. The small crumbling house on the outskirts of Silvergate was all he had to call home. After his father's sudden death, Alex became the sole provider for his mother, who had been bedridden for years, and his younger sister, who barely understood why their father was no longer around. But Alex understood all too well. Life had dealt him an unfair hand, and he had no choice but to play the cards he was given. The weight of his responsibilities pressed down on him like an iron chain, and every morning he woke up to the same grim reality, a mountain of bills, an unending cycle of work to pay off his father's debts, and the constant fear of what would happen if he couldn't make ends meet. He had dreams once, big ones. He wanted to be someone, to escape the suffocating grip of poverty that had shackled his family for generations. But those dreams seemed so far away now, like a distant memory. The world outside his little home felt like a place that belonged to someone else. Then one day, everything changed. It was Oliver Westbrook, a man who didn't know the meaning of the word mercy, who came knocking on his door. Oliver was a powerful figure in Silvergate, the patriarch of the Westbrook family, known for their immense wealth and influence. When he spoke, people listened and feared. His sharp eyes and impeccable suit made him look like a man who controlled everything around him. Alex, however, only saw him as the embodiment of everything that had kept him in the shadows all these years. So when Oliver offered Alex a position as a personal assistant for his son, Ethan Westbrook, Alex knew there was no way out. It wasn't an offer, it was an ultimatum. Ethan Westbrook had been Silvergate's golden boy. Handsome, brilliant, and adored by everyone around him, he was the heir to a legacy of power and prestige. But that was before the accident. A freak accident in space that left him in a coma for 3 years. The Westbrook family had kept Ethan's condition a secret, at least from the public eye, wanting to preserve their image. They couldn't afford to let their perfect son be seen as anything less than invincible. So they kept Ethan in a private wing of their mansion, surrounded by doctors, while the world moved on. Alex didn't know any of this when he was brought to the Westbrook estate. All he knew was that he had no choice but to accept the job. The pay was enough to get his family out of debt, and that was all that mattered. But he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as he stepped into the grand mansion for the first time. The place was cold, not just in temperature, but in its sheer emptiness. It felt like a house built on lies, beautiful on the outside, but hollow on the inside. For 3 years, Alex was nothing more than a shadow in Ethan's world. He was a caregiver, a servant, and a reminder of everything Ethan had lost. The Westbrooks hardly spoke to him, and the only time he felt like he mattered was when he was tending to Ethan's needs. Ethan, in his comatose state, was like a doll, a beautiful, broken doll that Alex had to keep clean and well cared for. Every day, Alex did his best to shield Ethan from the cold reality that had befallen him, though he didn't understand why he kept pushing himself like this. After all, Ethan was a stranger to him, someone he had only heard about in passing before taking the job. But as time passed, something began to shift. Ethan wasn't just a figure in a bed anymore. Slowly, imperceptibly, Alex found himself caring for the man who lay motionless before him. The more he cared for Ethan, the more Alex's feelings became tangled in a web of confusion and longing. He was supposed to be just the caretaker, but every time he looked at Ethan, now older, more handsome than he had ever imagined, his heart ached in a way he couldn't explain. He never signed up for this. He never asked for this. Ethan, despite being unconscious for most of the time, had a presence that Alex couldn't ignore. There were days when Alex would sit by Ethan's bedside, talking to him about everything and nothing. It was a one-sided conversation, of course. Ethan never responded, but somehow it felt like Ethan could hear him, and that was enough. It was the only thing that kept Alex going in the darkness of those long, lonely nights. But then, something unexpected happened. Ethan woke up. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden awakening with bright lights or beeping machines. It was a gradual thing, like a cloud lifting from a sky that had been overcast for years. One day, Ethan's fingers twitched. Then his eyes fluttered open. Alex was there, as he always had been, sitting beside him, wiping his forehead, humming softly to him. At first, Alex wasn't sure what to do. He had always imagined this moment, but never thought it would actually come. Ethan's gaze was blank at first, disoriented. His memories were hazy, like trying to recall a dream that was slipping away as he woke up. Alex had no idea what to say, or if he should even say anything. But before he could make up his mind, Ethan's voice, hoarse from disuse, whispered, "Who are you?" Alex froze. It wasn't the question he had been prepared for. He had been expecting something more like, "Where am I?" or "What happened?" But instead Ethan was asking about him, about Alex. I'm Alex," he stammered, his voice shaky. "I've been taking care of you." Ethan blinked, still trying to process the words. He didn't know who Alex was, and that was something Alex hadn't expected to feel hurt by. But the pain was there, subtle and sharp. Ethan was a stranger to him, even though Alex had spent years by his side. It was a strange kind of ache, a longing for something that felt so close and yet so far away. Over the following days, as Ethan's condition improved, their interactions became more frequent, more personal. Alex found himself talking to Ethan like he had never done before, telling him about his life, his struggles, his dreams, things he had never shared with anyone, and slowly, bit by bit, something shifted between them. Ethan began to recognize him, not just as the man who took care of him, but as someone who had been there all along. For Alex, it was both a relief and a new kind of pain. He wanted to be there for Ethan, wanted to be the one who helped him through this strange new life that he was now living. But at the same time, Alex couldn't help but wonder what his place was in Ethan's world. Would Ethan see him as just the guy who had been there when no one else was? Or would Ethan, with his perfect family and perfect life, never even consider someone like Alex as anything more than a servant? It wasn't supposed to be this way. Alex had always known his place in the world. He was a beta, born into poverty, and destined to stay there. Ethan, on the other hand, was an alpha, rich, powerful, and adored by everyone. They were from two completely different worlds, and Alex had accepted that a long time ago. But now, as he looked into Ethan's eyes, something inside of him whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the shadows. Part 2. The sound of Ethan's first breath was like a whisper against the storm. For 3 years, his family, the Westbrooks, had lived in a lie they tried to preserve with only the cold, sterile hum of machines and the occasional hushed conversation from staff keeping the illusion of normalcy alive. But now, Ethan was awake. He had woken up in a way no one expected. It wasn't with a dramatic burst of energy or a sudden surge of awareness. No, it was more like a slow unveiling, like dawn creeping over the horizon. He blinked, disoriented, and his first conscious thought was an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Ethan didn't remember what had happened. Not the accident. Not the fight he had been part of. Nothing. His memory, as if shrouded in thick fog, was unclear, fragmented, yet his body was physically healed. The wounds from the accident, the scars on his body, had faded with time and medical care. His family rejoiced in his recovery, but Ethan felt different. There was something fundamentally changed in him, and he couldn't explain it. The Westbrooks, especially his father, were eager to help Ethan return to his former life. They hoped that his memory would eventually return, that everything would go back to normal. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the life he had before was no longer his. It felt as if his old self, the person who had been adored by society, the charming and successful heir to the Westbrook legacy, was a stranger. The first time Ethan truly saw Alex, it was as though something inside him stirred. Alex Harding, his caregiver for the past 3 years, was standing in the doorway, looking at him with a mix of tenderness and wariness. Ethan didn't recognize the person standing before him, not at first. But there was something in the way Alex looked at him, something that made Ethan feel both confused and intrigued. It was the way Alex's eyes lingered just a second too long, like he was unsure how to greet a stranger, even though he had been by Ethan's side all this time. The truth was, Alex had been everything to him during his time in the coma. He had been the constant, the one who helped him through the darkest hours, even though Ethan couldn't remember it. But now, awake and in control of his own body, Ethan couldn't help but feel an unusual connection to Alex that he couldn't explain. It started small, a momentary glance, a brief touch, an offhand comment. But over time, those moments became something more. The bond that had formed between them in the silence of his comatose state began to evolve into something deeper, more tangible. Every time Alex spoke to him, it felt like his heart beat a little faster. Every time their hands brushed, something sparked within him, something undeniable. Ethan tried to push the feelings away, telling himself it was just a side effect of the trauma he had endured. But there was no denying the pull he felt toward Alex. He had no memory of their past, no recollection of the years Alex had spent caring for him, but somehow it felt as though Alex had always been there. In every moment of his recovery, in every act of kindness and patience, Alex had been a fixture. One night, as Alex helped Ethan change into a fresh set of clothes, it happened. It wasn't planned. It wasn't intentional. But in the small, dimly lit room, as Alex gently guided Ethan's arm into the sleeve of his shirt, their hands brushed, and then it was as though the world paused for just a second. A spark of electricity passed between them, an electric charge that neither of them could ignore. Ethan froze, staring at Alex, who also seemed stunned by the sudden, inexplicable sensation. It wasn't just a touch. It felt significant, as though everything they had both been through had culminated in this one fleeting moment. Ethan's breath hitched as he pulled back slightly, his heart racing. Alex too stepped back, his eyes wide and unsure of what had just happened. The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy. For a long moment neither of them knew what to say. Ethan opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. His thoughts were swirling, confused by the emotions that had suddenly surfaced. He didn't understand what he was feeling, why it felt so intense, but it was undeniable. And in that silence, Alex's expression slowly shifted, his gaze softening as he realized Ethan had felt it too. It was then that Alex realized the truth he had been denying for so long. He had always cared for Ethan, of course, but in that moment it became clear he loved him. He loved him in a way that he couldn't explain, a way that went beyond his role as a caregiver. Alex had tried to bury his feelings for Ethan, tried to pretend that his growing affection was just a result of the situation. But now, as he stood there, with Ethan so close, the truth was unavoidable. The problem was, Ethan wasn't supposed to feel this way. He wasn't supposed to fall for someone like Alex. someone who was just a beta, a person who didn't belong in his world. Alex had known this from the very beginning, deep down. He was just the help, a temporary fixture in Ethan's life. Once Ethan was better, once he was whole again, he would move on, as he always had, and so would Alex. But that didn't stop the ache in Alex's chest every time he saw Ethan look at him. It didn't stop the way his heart fluttered when Ethan smiled at him, and it certainly didn't stop the storm of confusion and longing that had taken root in his soul. For Ethan, things were even more complicated. He had been stripped of everything, his past, his identity, even his connection to the family, who had always seemed to love him unconditionally. But Alex had been there. Alex had been the one person who didn't see him as a failure, as a broken thing. Alex had been the one to show him patience, kindness, and tenderness when no one else could. And now Ethan realized he was developing feelings for him. But Ethan wasn't the kind of person to act on impulses. He had always been the golden boy, perfect, adored, and admired by everyone. But now everything felt so out of place. His memories were gone, and in their place were these confusing emotions for Alex. He couldn't understand why he felt this way, but he couldn't deny it either. Every time Alex was near, he felt his heart race, his breath catch, and a quiet longing that he had never known before. As the days passed, Ethan found himself more and more drawn to Alex, and the more time they spent together, the more he realized how deeply connected they were. It was as if their souls had been linked during the years he had been unconscious, and now that he was awake, the bond between them had only grown stronger. But there was a dark side to this newfound connection. Levi Westbrook, Ethan's older brother, could feel the shift in their relationship. Levi, always the charming and beloved Omega, had always seen Ethan as competition, but this was different. Levi had always had everything handed to him on a silver platter, and Ethan's return had only intensified the rivalry between them. He didn't just want Ethan to recover. He wanted to be the one in control, the one who had his family's attention. Levi's jealousy of Ethan had always been subtle but constant. Now, watching Ethan and Alex grow closer, it ignited something dangerous in him. He saw Alex not just as a caretaker, but as a threat to his place in the family. Levi couldn't stand the idea of Ethan finding solace, affection, and even love from someone who wasn't part of their world. Levi began to plot, trying to create rifts between them, to drive Alex away from Ethan. Because in Levi's mind, if anyone was going to be the one to claim Ethan's heart, it would be him. Levi's plans were only the beginning of the chaos that would soon unfold. But for now, Alex and Ethan were blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing. They were lost in their own tangled emotions, trying to navigate their complicated feelings for each other. And though their love seemed impossible, though it felt like they were on the verge of something both beautiful and devastating, they couldn't help but wonder, could they find a way to be together, despite everything? Or would the forces working against them tear them apart? Part 3. The air between Alex and Ethan had shifted. What had once been a delicate connection, a bond formed through years of care and quiet understanding, was now becoming something undeniable. With each passing day, their closeness grew. Ethan, now fully awake, began to recognize the gravity of the relationship they shared. He had spent years in a fog of uncertainty, but Alex was the one constant, the one person who had never looked at him with pity or as a fragile, broken shell. Alex had simply treated him like a person, a man worthy of respect even in the darkest hours. And as Ethan learned more about himself, he found that the affection he felt for Alex was not just out of gratitude, it was real and it was intense. But real life is never so simple. As Alex and Ethan spent more time together, the once smooth waters of the Westbrook household began to ripple with discontent. The tension, which had always existed beneath the surface, bubbled to the top. Ethan's sudden recovery was not just a personal victory, it was a political one too. The Westbrooks' pristine family image, which had been carefully constructed over the years, was suddenly threatened by the one thing no one could control: Ethan's heart. Levi Westbrook, Ethan's older brother, could sense the change almost immediately. He had always lived in Ethan's shadow, despite his own status as an Omega, the coveted type in a world ruled by power and wealth. But now the unthinkable had happened. Ethan, the Alpha, was falling for someone completely beneath him in the social hierarchy. Alex, a mere beta, was nothing more than an outsider to the Westbrook family, a servant in their eyes. To Levi, this was an insult to the Westbrook name, to their power, and to the natural order of things. The more time Ethan spent with Alex, the more Levi's resentment festered. Levi's jealousy ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. In the world they lived in, status was everything. As an Omega, Levi had been used to being cherished, to being viewed as a prize to be won. But Ethan, an Alpha, had the power to defy the system, to choose someone who was not just beneath him, but someone who didn't belong in his world. Levi couldn't accept it. Alex had always known his place. He had been taught by life to stay in the shadows, to serve those who held power, and to never dream of becoming something more. But Ethan had shaken him. Ethan had shown him the possibility of something else, something better. A life where Alex didn't have to hide his feelings, a life where he could be loved for who he was, not for what he could provide. But even as their relationship deepened, Alex couldn't ignore the looming presence of the Westbrook family, watching them, waiting for any reason to tear them apart. Levi and Oliver, Ethan's father, soon began to make their opposition known. The power struggle within the family had become more than just a personal matter for them. It was a fight for control, for the preservation of their legacy. They couldn't allow a beta like Alex to tarnish the family's reputation, to challenge the status quo. Oliver, though calm and calculating on the outside, was equally concerned about what Ethan's relationship with Alex meant for the family. He had spent years building the Westbrook empire, ensuring that the family name would remain untarnished. The idea of Alex, a mere caretaker, becoming too close to Ethan was not just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Oliver had seen the change in Ethan's eyes, the way he looked at Alex, and he knew that their bond had grown deeper than anyone expected. So the pressure began to mount on Alex. He found himself torn between his duty to Ethan, the man he had come to love, and his desire to break free from the control of the Westbrook family. Every day, Alex was reminded of the risks involved in this forbidden love. If he stayed, he risked everything, his freedom, his dignity, and even his safety. But if he left, he would be abandoning Ethan, the only person who had ever truly made him feel seen and understood. One night, as Alex walked through the sprawling Westbrook estate, his thoughts were a tangled mess. He couldn't deny his feelings for Ethan any longer. But what was the point of continuing something that was never meant to be? He had been nothing more than a caretaker, a background figure in Ethan's life. He was a beta, a mere servant to the Westbrook family, and he knew that no matter how much Ethan loved him, the family would never accept their relationship. Just as Alex's resolve began to weaken, a familiar voice called out to him, "Alex." He turned to see Ethan standing in the doorway of the study, his expression unreadable. In the weeks since his awakening, Ethan had become more expressive, his emotions no longer hidden behind the veil of his coma. There was something in his eyes now, something that made Alex's heart beat faster. "Come here," Ethan said softly, his voice almost a command. Alex hesitated, but only for a moment. He had grown so used to Ethan's presence that now it was impossible to stay away. He walked toward him, the distance between them seeming to close in an instant. Ethan was standing by a large window, gazing out at the stormy night, his back to the room. "I know you've been avoiding me," Ethan said quietly, almost as though he were speaking to himself. But I don't want to avoid this anymore. I don't want to pretend that everything's fine when it isn't. Alex's heart dropped. Ethan... No, let me say this, Ethan interrupted, turning to face him. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that Alex had never seen before. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know how to make sense of it all. But when I wake up, when I look at you, I feel something. Something I can't ignore. Something I don't want to ignore. Alex stood frozen. This was it. The moment he had been both dreading and longing for. Ethan had finally acknowledged what they both felt, and now Alex had to decide what to do with it. I care about you, Alex, Ethan continued, stepping closer. I don't know why I feel this way, but I know that I don't want to be without you. I don't care if they don't approve. I don't care what anyone thinks. I just know I can't lose you. The words hit Alex like a tidal wave. He wanted to believe Ethan. He wanted to believe that they could have something real, something lasting. But the weight of the world, the weight of the Westbrook family, was too much. Alex couldn't see a future with Ethan, not without destroying everything he had ever known. Before he could say anything, Ethan reached for him. His touch was gentle but insistent, his fingers brushing Alex's cheek, pulling him into a kiss that was both tentative and desperate. For a moment, the world around them disappeared. The storm outside, the pressure of their families, the dangers that loomed, it all faded away. In that moment, it was just the two of them. But when the kiss broke, reality rushed back in. Alex pulled away, his face flushed, his heart pounding. He couldn't do this. Not like this. I don't know if we can do this, Ethan, Alex whispered, his voice shaky. I don't know if I can keep living in their world. I don't know if I can keep pretending that we have a future when the whole world is against us. Ethan's expression softened. He stepped back, giving Alex the space he needed. We'll figure it out, he said softly. We have to. But the truth was, Alex wasn't so sure. As much as he loved Ethan, the weight of the Westbrook family's expectations was suffocating. He had already lost so much, and he wasn't sure he was strong enough to fight against the forces that would tear them apart. The storm outside raged on, but inside, the air was thick with tension. The world around them was changing, shifting, and both Alex and Ethan had to decide what they were willing to risk for the love they shared. Would they fight for each other, or would the world's expectations crush them before they had a chance to find happiness? Part 4. What happens when the world tells you who you should love, and you decide to choose your own path, no matter the cost? For Alex and Ethan, that question had lingered in their minds for far too long. It was the kind of question that haunted them during sleepless nights, when they were alone and vulnerable, and when they were forced to face the harsh reality of the lives they were living. It was a question that had driven them to the brink of despair, but now standing on the precipice of everything they had ever known, they both knew the answer. They were done with Silvergate, done with the lies, done with the expectations, done with the constant battle for approval from a family that never saw them for who they truly were, and most importantly, they were done with the suffocating grip of society's judgments, which had decided who was worthy of love and who was not. It was time to leave it all behind. The decision to leave wasn't an easy one. In fact, it was the hardest decision they had ever made. For Ethan, leaving meant abandoning the wealth and power that came with his name, the very things that had defined his existence for so long. The Westbrooks were his family, his blood. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that none of it mattered. The riches, the fame, the title, they meant nothing without the one person who had shown him what it meant to be truly alive. Alex. For Alex, it was just as difficult, though in a different way. He had never belonged to the world of power and privilege that Ethan had been born into, but Leaving Silvergate meant walking away from everything he had fought for, everything he had sacrificed. He had spent his whole life struggling to make ends meet, and for the first time, he was offered a way out. Yet every time he thought about staying, about walking away from Ethan to keep a sense of stability, his heart rebelled. They could live with nothing as long as they were together. The day they left Silvergate was bittersweet. Alex and Ethan packed their things quietly, carefully, as if the weight of what they were about to do was too heavy to carry aloud. They didn't say much to each other. The silence between them was not one of distance, but of shared understanding. Neither of them knew what awaited them on the other side of their decision, but they both knew they had to try. They drove away from the mansion in the dead of night, the city lights slowly fading behind them. Ethan, with his strong, commanding presence, felt like a part of him was letting go of everything he had ever known. But the look on Alex's face, the way he smiled softly, a quiet affirmation that this was the right choice, made him feel like he was walking into something new, something full of possibility. "Do you think it's crazy?" Alex asked, his voice breaking the silence in the car. Ethan glanced at him, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. "I think it's exactly what we need." The first few weeks were difficult. They settled in a small town far from the luxury of Silvergate, a place where no one knew who they were. It was a fresh start, but with that came the challenge of building a life from scratch. Ethan, who had always relied on his family's wealth, found himself needing to learn new skills, to find ways to contribute that didn't involve his status as the Westbrook heir. For Alex, it was no less difficult. He had always worked hard for everything he had, but now he and Ethan were learning to live in a way they never had before, free from the expectations that had once defined their lives. They found small jobs in the town, nothing glamorous, but enough to keep them going. They rented a modest apartment, far from the mansions of Silvergate, and started to build a routine. They cooked together, laughed together, and talked long into the night about everything, their hopes, their fears, and the future they dreamed of. It was simple, but for the first time, it felt real. Still, the road wasn't without its struggles. There were moments when the weight of their past lives threatened to pull them back into the world they had left behind. Ethan, in particular, struggled with the memories of his family's expectations, the constant pressure to be perfect. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night, his mind racing with thoughts of the Westbrooks and the legacy they had forced him to live up to. He knew he had made the right choice, but it didn't make it any easier. Alex, too, faced his own demons. He had spent years being told he was nothing more than a servant, a beta with no place in the world. Even now, as he stood by Ethan's side, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't deserve this life. But every time he looked at Ethan, really looked at him, he was reminded that he was worthy of love, of happiness. Ethan had chosen him, and that choice was enough. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their new apartment, looking out at the stars, Ethan turned to Alex, his expression serious but warm. "You know," Ethan began softly, "I never imagined I could be this happy. Before I thought I had everything. I thought power, wealth, and status were everything. But now I see that all that matters is us. Just us." Alex smiled, his heart swelling with emotions he couldn't quite name. "I always knew there was more to life than what we had back in Silvergate," he said, his voice steady. "But I never imagined it would be like this. This is freedom, Ethan." Ethan reached out, taking Alex's hand in his fingers gentle but firm. "This is us, Alex. This is our life. And I'm not going back. Not for anyone." For the first time, Alex felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. In Ethan's eyes, he saw not just a future, but a future where they could live freely, where they could love without fear of judgment. And in that moment, he knew that their love, Their bond was stronger than any obstacle they had faced or would ever face. The town they had settled in became more than just a place to live. It became a symbol of their defiance. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. They were living proof that love could conquer anything, that no amount of money or power could replace the freedom to choose one's own path. Alex and Ethan didn't just escape Silvergate, they had escaped the chains of society's expectations, the roles that had been forced upon them. As time passed, their relationship became an inspiration to those around them. In a world that often told them who they should love and who they should be, Alex and Ethan's love stood as a testament to the power of choosing your own destiny. It wasn't easy, but it was theirs, and that was enough. They weren't perfect, and their journey wasn't without its bumps, but they had found something that most people spent their entire lives searching for: freedom. Freedom to love. Freedom to be themselves. And most importantly, freedom to build a life that was truly their own. One day, as they sat in their favorite little cafe, sipping coffee and enjoying the quiet hum of the town around them, Ethan turned to Alex and smiled, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "I think it's time," he said, his voice full of conviction. "Time for what?" Alex asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan took a deep breath, his heart racing in the most thrilling way. "Time to take the next step." Alex looked at him, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" Ethan stood up, holding out his hand. "I mean, it's time to make this official, Alex. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. No more running, no more hiding, just us." Alex's heart skipped a beat as he looked into Ethan's eyes. The same eyes that had once been filled with uncertainty, now shining with absolute certainty. Without thinking, he reached out and took Ethan's hand, a smile spreading across his face. "Yes," Alex whispered, his voice full of emotion. "Yes, I want that too." And in that moment, with the world around them fading into the background, Alex and Ethan knew that they had truly found freedom. A freedom not just from the constraints of society, but from the fear that had once held them back. They had chosen each other, and in doing so, they had chosen a love that was stronger than anything the world could throw at them. They had found their way to freedom, together. And that was all that mattered.